Warm greetings and welcome, dear audience. We are here again today with another, the same professional masterclass under research, understanding research. But today we have this topic. This is lecture number 2 under formulating research questions and hypothesis. This is part 1. So for this, I would like to invite again our professor, Dr. Rania Lampu, to start her session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stella and all the team of Elegant Empire Education for this great opportunity you give me in order to promote quality, not only quality education, but also quality research worldwide. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all to today's session. So whether you are a seasoned researcher just beginning your research, your academic journey, this topic could say that lies at the heart of all meaningful inquiry, because every successful research project begins with a well-crafted question, one that is clear, focused, and researchable. From this question arises the hypothesis, the statement that guides the direction of our investigation and analysis. So today we will explore how to refine ideas into strong, testable research questions and how to shape those questions into hypotheses that can be examined through evidence. Our aim is not only to help you understand the what and why, but also the how. We will dive into examples from various disciplines, learn how to avoid common pitfalls, and hopefully will leave you more confident in designing your own research. So thank you for being here, for attending, and I encourage you, of course, to ask questions, to write in the chat box, everything you want, to share your thoughts and engage actively throughout the session. So once again, welcome, and I will start now sharing my presentation. Wait a minute now, I think pause. Wait a minute. Sorry. I think it's visible now.
I just added to the screen. Yeah, to the stage. Yeah,
can
visible.
you see? Can you see the change of slides also? Okay, the change of slides. Okay.
Yes, everything is good.
Okay. A well-crafted, a well-formulated research question is the foundation of any research study. Why? Because it guides the direction, focus, and scope of the entire research process. A well-formulated research question is clear, is focused, is researchable, and it provides a pathway for generating meaningful paths. So what defines a good research question and how this influences the research process? It should be clear, specific, precise, and focus on a particular aspect of a topic, avoiding vague language. It should be focused, so the question should be narrow enough to be answered effectively within the time and resources available. A narrow question ensures that the research remains manageable and feasible. The question should be testable and capable of being answered through data collection and analysis. It must be framed in a way that allows for empirical investigation. And also, a good research question addresses a gap in the existing literature real-world problem and combines, actually tries we could say, to contribute to knowledge in this field in order to cover the gap. And of course, what about the influence of on the entire research process? The research question influences the methodology used in the study, whether it's qualitative or quantitative or mixed methods. It defines how data will be collected and what tools will be used and how the data will be analyzed. For example, if your research question is quantitative, let's say an example, what is the relationship between daily exercise and heart rate reduction? Then you will use statistical methods and surveys to collect data. For a qualitative question, like how do individuals perceive the effects of exercise on mental well-being, interviews or focus groups might be the preferred method. So this is guides the study design. Second, shapes the hypothesis because the research question forms the basis for developing hypotheses. A good research question leads to hypotheses that are testable and directly related to the question. For example, from the research question, how does exercise affect sleep quality in adults? The hypothesis could be regular exercise improves sleep quality in adults. Third, directs data collection because this question specifies what kind of data needs to be collected, including the variables, samples, and methods of measurement. For instance, if the research question focuses on how does social support impact recovery in patients with chronic illness, then the data collection process will focus on patient recovery metrics and social support measurements. It defines scope and feasibility because a well-defined research question helps limit the scope of the study to what is practical and achievable. Without a clear research question, the study may become too broad or too complex. For example, asking what are the effects of sleep deprivation and productivity across different industries, this would require a large multi-industry study, which may not be feasible. A more focused question like, what are the effects of sleep deprivation and productivity in the healthcare sector? This may be more achievable. And it influences interpretation because the research question influences, we could say, the way data is interpreted and the conclusions that are drawn. A focused, clear question leads to meaningful conclusions that are relevant to the research field. For example, answering the research question, does increased screen time contribute to childhood obesity? This will lead to conclusions that can inform public health recommendations, while a vague question like how does screen time affect children, this could lead to what? To inconclusive or irrelevant findings. Therefore, in essence, we could say that a well-formulated research question serves as a foundation for the entire research process because it defines the approach and methods of the study, it directs data collection analysis, it leads to the creation of a clear hypothesis, it helps ensure that the research are focused on relevant and feasible, and of course, it provides the framework for drawing meaningful conclusions. By ensuring that a research question is specific, clear, and measurable, the researcher sets the stage for the study that is both, we could say, methodologically sound and capable of contributing valuable knowledge to the field. Now, how can we differentiate between a research question and a hypothesis? What is the difference between research question and a hypothesis? Differentiating between research question and hypothesis actually is an important part of the research process. Both play a distinct role distinct roles in guiding the study and understanding the differences their differences, this could help us set a clear direction for our research. So how we can distinguish between the two? The research question is a clear, focused, specific question that actually researchers seeks to answer through their study. It identifies the central issue or problem that will guide the investigation. What is the purpose? The purpose is that the research question sets the stage for the study by identifying what the researcher is trying to explore, to investigate, or understand. What is the nature? But here the research question is typically open-ended and designed to explore or examine a topic. I can give you an example. How does brain-based learning affect students' attention span in elementary school classrooms? This is an example of a research question. On the other hand, hypothesis. Hypothesis is a testable prediction or a statement that is based on existing knowledge, such as what the researcher expects to find in the study, and it proposes an answer to the research question before conducting the research. What is the purpose here is that the hypothesis provides a direction for the study by stating what the researcher anticipates will happen, and this allows for empirical testing. Here, the hypothesis, the nature of hypothesis is specific and testable. Sometimes it suggests a relationship between variables. And I can give you an example. Students who engage in brain-based learning activities will have a higher level of sustained attention compared to students in traditional learning settings. So you can understand what are the differences. Well, research question is open-ended while exploring a topic. On the other hand, hypothesis is a specific prediction based on prior knowledge. Research question identifies what the researcher aims to study or understand. Hypothesis proposes a possible explanation to be tested. The research question is not necessarily testable directly. Hypothesis is always testable and verifiable. How? Through experiments and data analysis. The research question is often framed as a question how, what, why. Hypothesis is framed as a statement. It often includes variables. Also, I gave some examples before, but again, we can see another example. What is the impact of sleep on memory recall in teenagers? That would be a research question. And the hypothesis could be teenagers who get 8 hours of sleep will perform better on memory recall tasks than those who sleep less. How these two work together? The research question lays the foundation by identifying the topic of interest, and at the same time, the hypothesis takes this question and predicts the outcome based on existing knowledge and theory, guiding this way the research towards a specific direction. An example of this relationship, how does exercise impact cognitive function in elderly adults? This is the research question, and hypothesis is that elderly adults who engage in regular exercise will show improved cognitive function compared to those who don't exercise. This should be testable. So this example of these relationships between two, and why, in short, I could say that the research question asks, what are you trying to investigate? And the hypothesis predicts what you expect to find as an answer to that question. So this is, I think it's clear now. Why it is important to clearly define variables when we formulate research questions? Because it's something that provides clarity, it ensures what we call measurability. Variables need to be defined in terms that are measurable or observable. Researchers can select appropriate instruments and design experiments based on the clearly defined variables. So we talk about data collection, enables replicability. Defining variables precisely ensures that the study can be replicated by other researchers, reduces ambiguity. When variables are ambiguous, it becomes hard to compare results across studies, interpret findings, or draw reliable conclusions. It helps establish relationships between variables, ensures validity, reliability, and of course, enhances theoretical foundation. Why? Because clear variable definitions help connect the research to the underlying theory and allow this way the researcher to test theoretical concepts. Why it matters? Because researchers often design studies to test theories. Without clear variables, the connection to existing theory may become vague or unfocused. An example, A study exploring self-determination theory could clearly define variables such as autonomy and motivation. So, in summary, we would say that defining variables clearly is foundational to the research process because it helps researchers to focus on the study, to ensure accurate recollection, establish clear relationships between variables, and avoid ambiguity. Now, how do we identify a gap in existing literature that leads to a variable research question? This is a critical step. This process actually involves thoroughly reviewing existing research, identifying areas that haven't been fully explored or addressed, and then formulating a question that can fill the gap. So first, conducting a thorough literature review. What this involves in order to identify gaps, you must first review existing studies related to your topic. So this helps you understand what has already been researched, what methodologies were used, and the conclusions drawn from previous studies. Why it is important? Because a comprehensive review helps you avoid duplicating existing research and guides you towards unexplored areas. You can use for resources academic databases like Google Scholar or PubMed or institutional libraries to access peer-reviewed papers. Analyze patterns and trends in the literature. Here we try to identify the major themes, the methods, the findings in the existing body of work. So we look for inconsistencies, consistencies and inconsistencies. For example, are there conflicting results in previous studies? These inconsistencies could signal areas where further investigation is needed. What are the trends, for example? Are there emerging topics or new technologies that haven't been fully explored? Or we could have underserved populations or contexts. Are there groups, settings, or environments that have been overlooked in existing studies? So what is important? Because by analyzing patterns, you can spot them under research areas where your study could add value. Identify limitations in existing studies. What this involves read the limitation sections of research papers carefully. Researchers often point out areas that require further investigation or aspects that were beyond the scope of the study. Common limitations might include small sample sizes or lack of diversity in participants, methodological limitations such as reliance on a simple technique or lack of longitudinal data or geographical contextual constraints. And why this is important? Because these limitations often highlight areas that are ripe for further research, and addressing them this can lead to a more robust and generalizable study. Then examine and unanswered questions or contradictions. Pay attention to the unanswered questions and recommendations for future research often presented at the end of the papers. So authors may suggest new perspectives on the issue or areas where findings were inconclusive or need further exploration. Opportunities to test a theory in different contexts or with new variables. And why it's important? Because these suggestions from previous researchers provide a roadmap for identifying gaps. Look for areas of rapid development and innovation. This means focus on emerging technologies, methodologies, or trends that are not yet fully explored in the existing literature. For instance, the use of AI in education or the impact of neuroadaptive learning in classrooms may be new fields with room for further exploration. So why it is important? Because areas where innovation is happening may have limited research, offering an opportunity for original contributions. And definitely cross-disciplinary insights. Sometimes gaps can emerge from cross-disciplinary approaches, bringing together theories, methods, or ideas from different fields to tackle an existing problem in a novel way. For example, combining neuroscience in education might reveal new insights into brain-based learning that haven't been fully explored by either field alone. And Why it's important? Because by looking across disciplines, you might uncover unique gaps or unexplored connections. Assess some theoretical gaps. Evaluate whether the current literature is based on outdated or complete theories, or if new theories or frameworks have emerged that haven't been fully tested. So what's important? Because a gap in theory might be a good starting point for a research question, so new theories can offer fresh perspective or challenge previous assumptions. If a certain theory in educational psychology hasn't been updated in the context of modern learning technologies, this could be an area of exploration. Um, and identifying underrepresented marginalized groups. So this involves, for example, looking for populations that may have been understudied or excluded in previous research. For example, that could be marginalized groups or specific age groups or unique cultural contexts. Researching how specific variables or interventions impact underrepresented groups, this can fill an important gap and make research more inclusive. For example, if the impact of virtual learning environments has mainly been studied with high school students in Western countries, studying how these environments affect low-income students or elderly learners, this could be a valuable gap to address. Then check for outdated research, formulating was a research question I mentioned before, and an example of gap identification process. You review studies on the impact of interactive learning technologies on student engagement. Many studies focus on K-12 students, but there is a limited research on how technology can affect adult learners. What is the gap here? That there is no comprehensive study on how interactive learning technologies influence engagement and retention among other learners in education. This is an example. So what could be the research question here? How do interactive learning technologies affect engagement and retention in adult learners enrolled in online courses? By summarizing, I could say that identifying the gap in the literature involves thorough reading, critical analysis, and a keen eye for areas that have been unexplored or neglected or where there is potential for innovation. Once you have identified the gap, you can formulate a research question that fills this gap and contributes to the field. Now, what methods can be used to ensure that the research question is both originally significant? What I have already mentioned, conducting thorough review, analyzing existing theories to build on existing knowledge while exploring new directions that theory or practice hasn't fully addressed. How to do it? Examine new theories and conceptual frameworks that have been used in your area of research. Try to challenge these frameworks. Are they outdated? Are they incomplete or limited in scope? Do they fail to account for new developments of technologies? So try to adapt and extend existing theories to create a fresh perspective or uncover new dimensions. What would be the outcome here is because that's analyzing and possibly extending existing theories, you ensure that your research question is significant by contributing to or challenging established knowledge. Consult with experts and mentors to gain insights and advice from experienced researchers. We can guide you towards important and original research questions. And how to do it? You can reach out to faculty members, mentors, or colleagues who have experience in your research area, attend conferences, seminars, or workshops where researchers discuss their work and ask for feedback on your research idea. Listen for suggestions about unexplored areas or emerging trends. So the outcome here is that experts can offer suggestions from original research questions that may not have been fully explored and can point you towards significant areas that are worthy of investigation. Identify emerging trends in order to ensure that your research question addresses current and future challenges in your field. How to do it? This means that you need to keep up to date with emerging trends or technological advancements, new methodologies in your area of study, to look for innovations or technological developments that might require fresh research or deeper understanding. Identifying global or local issues that are only beginning to emerge and need attention from the research community. So focusing on emerging trends ensures that your research question is original and addresses relevant issues that are currently shaping the field. Focus always on real-world problems, because this way we can ensure that our research question is relevant and has practical applications. Consider cross-disciplinary approach. I mentioned about this before. Use qualitative and mixed methods. Evaluate the impact of previous research, and of course, to test, in order to refine and test the originality and significance of a research question before committing to a full study. Sometimes we need to pilot. We need a pilot study as a preliminary research. Conduct a pilot study or small-scale investigation in order to explore the feasibility and novelty of the research question. Test your question with a limited sample or through a brief literature review to see if it yields new insights or challenges existing assumptions. So, a summary of methods is conduct reviews, analyze existing theories, seek expert advice, consult with mentors, stay informed always about emerging trends, focus on solving real-world problems, consider cross-disciplinary approaches, evaluate past research, and test the question through pilot studies. How now can we ensure that a research question is feasible, considering the available resources and time? You need to define the scope clearly, narrow down the focus, identify key variables, break down the main aspects of the question, and ensure that clearly defined and measurable. Assess available resources. Consider your budget, your equipment of materials, for example, human resources, access to data, the time constraints, the project timeline. Are there any realistic deadlines? Your skill set. Assess your expertise, your training requirements, your data collection process, the availability of participants, the ethical considerations. What would be your appropriate methodology, your data analysis techniques? What about feedback, pilot testing, and considering always alternatives? This means be prepared with an alternative approach if the initial one turns out to be impractical. A plan B, a more manageable research question, may be required if unforeseen challenges arise. Now, how do descriptive, relational, and causal research questions differ in their formulation and application? First of all, talk about descriptive research questions to describe characteristics of phenomena as they exist without delving into relationships and cause. This is the purpose. The goal here, if we talk about descriptive research questions, is to focus on providing a clear and accurate description of a particular variable or phenomenon. It aims to answer what, who, where, and when. These questions tend to be broad and specific to observations of phenomena without making predictions or examining causal relationships. Example questions: what are the main characteristics of urbanization in a specific region? What is the average income of people in a certain city? So here, how could be the application? Descriptive research questions are used when the goal is to gather baseline information or to quantify aspects of a population phenomenon. It often involves surveys, observational content analysis, example studies, demographic studies, market research, observational studies, etc. Second, relational research questions. In order to explore here, the purpose is to explore relationships or associations between two or more variables without implying cause and effect. The goal here is to investigate whether and how variables are related, often answering the question, what is the relationship between X and Z, for example? These questions focus on identifying correlations or patterns, such as how one variable may change in relation to another. It doesn't assume one variable causes the other, but examines the strength and nature of the association. Example questions: is the relationship between the amount of exercise and mental well-being in adults? How does income level relate to education attainment? What is the correlation between age and smartphone usage? Relational research questions are used when researchers want to understand associations or patterns between variables but do not seek to infer causality. Techniques like correlation analysis or regression analysis are commonly used to answer relational questions. Investigating the link between social media usage and academic performance, studying the connection between work hours and job satisfaction. This is an example. And now, causal research questions. Here, the purpose is to determine cause and effect relationships between variables. These questions investigate how one variable, the independent variable, influences or causes changes in another variable, the dependent variable. The focus is on why and how something happens. Causal research questions are more specific and focus on the direction of influence. They're typically framed as hypotheses predicting that a change in one variable will cause a change in another. I can give you some examples of these questions. Does regular exercise reduce the risk of heart disease in adults? How does increased screen time impact children's sleep patterns? So, causal research questions require controlled experimental designs or longitudinal studies to establish cause and effect. Researchers often use randomized controlled trials, experiments, or statistical methods that control for confounding variables. So, experimental studies testing the effects of a drug, randomized control trials, or studies testing interventions. That would be an example of these studies. So, if we wanted to summarize, we could say here, you can see the key differences. Descriptive describes characteristics phenomena. Relational explores relationship associations. Causal establishes cause and effect relationships. The first one, descriptive, focuses on what, who, where, and when. Relational, how variables are related to one another. Causal, how one variable causes change in another. Example question, what is the average income in a city? Relational, what is the relationship between education and causal? Does increased exercise reduce the risk of heart disease? Methodology, of course, descriptive, uses surveys, observations, content analysis, relational, correlation, regression analysis, and causal experiments, control trials, longitudinal studies. What will be the outcome? For descriptive, we talk about descriptive data, percentages, frequencies. Relational identifies trends and direction of relationships, and causal identifies causal effects and predicting outcomes. So what are some key considerations for application? That descriptive research is used when there is a need to simply gather data on the phenomenon, often as a precursor to more detailed research. Relational research is useful for exploring patterns or trends between variables. This helps them to form hypotheses for more complex studies. And complex research is ideal when the goal is to make predictions or test specific hypotheses about cause and effect. So this, of course, requires, as I mentioned before, control environment with experimental designs, experimental control, and rigorous methods. What criteria should be considered when we choose between qualitative and quantitative research? This is very important. I think the most important part of my presentation today. When we choose between qualitative or quantitative questions, it's important to carefully consider the nature of the research problem, the goals of the study, and the type of data needed. These factors will help define which approach is most appropriate for answering your research question effectively. So here are some key criteria. Qualitative research questions are exploratory in nature. So qualitative research is best suited for exploring phenomena in depth, especially when we have when there are few existing theories. It's useful when you want to understand experiences, perspectives, or meanings. For example, what are the lived experiences of patients undergoing chemotherapy? On the other hand, quantitative research questions here. Quantitative research is used for questions that focus on measuring, counting, or examining the relationships between variables. These questions are often more specific, designed to gather statistical data. Example, does the number of hours spent on social media correlate with levels of anxiety in adolescents? And what is the purpose of the study for each one of these methods? Qualitative research Um, this targets to uncover how and why something happens rather than focusing on how much. So we talk about meaning making, process interpretation of experiences. We talk about open-ended questions. So we can explore complexities and nuances that can't be captured with numerical data. And on the other hand, quantitative research, this measures and quantifies relationships. So this is, seeks to establish patterns, relationship, or statistical significance and to generalize findings from a sample to a larger population. Here we have close-ended answers, yes or no, or scaled responses which can be statistically analyzed. The nature of data, um, Qualitative data, of course, textual, visual, etc. Quantitative data has to do with numerical data and other criteria. It's about, for example, scope of a study. Qualitative has a narrower scope and deep insights. Quantitative data has a broader scope, generalizable results. The type of analysis, thematic or content analysis for qualitative analysis. Quantitative is about statistical analysis, researcher's level of objectivity and objectivity, qualitative research, subjective understanding, quantitative research, objective measure, the time resource available, time consuming and resource intensive, a quantitative research, faster data collection and analysis. Research goals, exploration and depth, quantitative research, measurement and comparison. So the summary of criteria for choosing between qualitative and quantitative research question includes this. Includes the following: research problem, qualitative for exploration and understanding, quantitative for measurement and comparison. For study purpose, qualitative for in-depth insights, quantitative for statistical analysis and generalization, qualitative for textual or descriptive data, quantitative for numerical or statistical data, qualitative for narrow specific topics, quantitative for broader generalizable findings. Qualitative uses thematic content analysis, quantitative uses statistical methods. Qualitative is subjective, quantitative is objective. Qualitative can be time consuming, quantitative may be faster and more resource efficient. And qualitative is about exploration, theory generation. Quantitative is about testing hypotheses and making generalizations. Choosing between the two depends largely on your research objectives, of course, on the data you need and the methods that you plan to use. It's important to clearly define what you aim to achieve and select the method that aligns best with your research goals. Now, how can you narrow down a broad research question to a specific researchable question? This is also very critical here. Narrowing down a broad research question to a specific researchable question is an essential step, of course, because a well-defined focus question will provide direction to your study, make it easier to design your methodology and collect meaningful data. We started with a broad topic, what it involves. We begin with a broad area of interest that we want to explore. This might be a general subject, phenomenon, or issue. For example, impact of technology in education. Okay, this is a broad topic. Then you conduct a preliminary literature review. You read an existing research to see how others have approached the topic. You look for trends, for gaps I mentioned before, or areas that need further exploration. Why? Because a literature review helps you understand the scope of existing research and identify what has been studied, what remains unexplored. For example, discover that many studies focus on technology in K-12 education, but fewer studies examine the impact of technology on higher education students. Then you identify a specific aspect or angle of the topic. From a broad topic, you identify a specific aspect, population, or condition that interests you. Focusing on a particular element makes research manageable and allows for depth rather than breadth. And an example of this, instead of just impact on, I mentioned before about impact on technology and education, which is very broad, then we can narrow it to say, we can say impact of mobile learning apps on university students' study habits. So the first one is very general, and the other one is more feasible and Here we try to narrow the broader into more measurable and specific research question. Now, then we need to consider the type of study or research design, decide what kind of study you will conduct. Mixed methods, qualitative, quantitative, and the type of data that you will need, surveys, experiments, reviews, because the type of research design will affect how you frame your question and what kind of data you will collect. For example, you may want to conduct a survey to measure how frequently students use mobile learning apps, or intervention study to see if mobile apps improve student performance. Then we define the key variables. What involves break down your question into specific variables that can be measured or observed, and this might include independent variables, for example, the factor you manipulate, and dependent variables. What is dependent variables? The outcome you measure. Why it matters? Because clearly defining the variables ensures that your question is specific and measurable. Example, use of mobile learning apps. This is independent variable. University student study habits or academic performance. This is a dependent variable. Okay, I think this was clear. Try to make the question feasible, ensure that the question is clear and focused, check for relevance and contribution, and always refine the question using the framework. This framework involves population problem, P, I, intervention exposure, P, who or what is the study focusing on? I, what is intervention treatment being studied? Comparison, C, is there a comparison group or condition? O, outcome. What is the time, what are the expected outcomes or results? Time, what is the time frame for the study? For a healthcare question, instead of asking how does exercise impact health, you could use this framework in order to refine it like this. P, adults with hypertension. I, regular aerobic exercise. C, no exercise. This is the control group. O, reduction in blood pressure. T, 12 weeks. So the refined question could be, in adults with hypertension, how does a regular aerobic exercise compared to no exercise affect blood pressure over 12 weeks? Some broad topic, then we go to preliminary review. These are the steps. Narrow to a specific focus. You need clear variables here. We explained the dependent variable, refine for feasibility, and final research question. What are some key tips to narrow down a broad question? Be always specific. Be focused, make it researchable, and avoid overly broad questions. Now, how does the scope of the research question affect the hypothesis? The scope of the research question actually significantly influences the formulation of hypothesis. Why? Because it defines the boundaries, focus, and depth of inquiry. The scope dictates how specific or general the hypothesis needs to be and shapes the research design. So here we can break down scope and specificity of the research question. First, a narrow scope, a broad scope, the scope and the type of hypothesis, directional hypothesis, when the research question is focused on specific, no direction hypothesis, so no directional. The scope and complexity of hypothesis, because a narrow research question typically leads to similar hypotheses, usually involving just a few variables. It focuses on cause and effect or association between clearly defined variables. On the other hand, a broad research question often leads to more complex hypotheses. A narrow question often leads to more controlled research design with clear operationalization of variables, focused data collection methods, and a precise approach to analysis. On the other hand, a broad research question may require a more flexible research design, such as qualitative or exploratory approaches, which are better suited to capturing complex multifactorial relationships. The scope and the level of abstraction Hypotheses formed around narrow research questions are often concrete, focusing on observable, measurable outcomes and variables. Scope of generalization. A hypothesis which is based on a narrow research question is typically easier to generalize to a larger population once proven. Why? Because the results are focused and applicable to specific contexts. On the other hand, a hypothesis which is based on a broad research question might be harder to generalize as it may apply only to specific subgroups, etc. Now, literature review I mentioned before play a critical role in defining the critical question. Already mentioned this because this provides a foundation of existing knowledge, helping to clarify gaps to guide the research design, ensuring that research is both original and significant. So, as I mentioned before, we need to identify gaps in existing knowledge, uncover areas that have not been sufficiently explored. A well-conducted literature review highlights these gaps, guiding you towards areas that need further exploration. Clarify the scope and focus. A literature review allows you to understand the breadth and depth of the existing research, helping you to narrow down the focus of your research question. Understand theoretical conceptual frameworks used in the field. By reviewing these frameworks, you can refine your research question in order to ensure that it aligns with existing theoretical perspectives or challenge prevailing theories in a meaningful way. Identify, I give an example here about frameworks. If research in the area of consumer behavior mainly uses the theory of plant behavior, you may choose to refine your question in order to say that how does perceived control influence purchasing decisions in online shopping environments. This is how we build on existing theory. Then we identify key variables and relationships. Because the literature review helps you identify these variables that have been studied and how they relate to one another. It reveals, we could say, the different ways researchers have conceptualized these variables and measured their impact. Then, try to avoid redundancy, ensuring originality. It helps us with understanding methodological approaches, frame the research question in the context of the field, strengthen the rationale of the study, enhance, of course, the research design, and finally form the hypothesis or research objectives. Now, what makes a hypothesis testable and how does it relate to the research question? A hypothesis is considered testable when it can be supported or refuted through empirical observation and data collection. So the ability to test a hypothesis is a crucial aspect of the scientific method. Why? Because it ensures that the hypothesis is grounded on observable, measurable evidence rather than speculation.
Yeah, please bring some water.
Yes.
It's not easy, I know. Yeah, speaking well.
Okay.
Please take time to drink water first.
Yes, thank you. So, clear definition of variables, empirical measurement, very important. The ability to be proven false. A testable hypothesis must be falsifiable, meaning that it can be proven false through empirical evidence. Specificity or prediction, operationalization of concepts, and clarity, direction of relationship. What is this? A hypothesis should ideally predict a direction or strength of relationship between variables, whether positive or negative, or if there is no relationship at all. This gives direction to the testing process and guides the interpretation of results. So how this relates to the research question? The research question may lead you to ask about relationships between variables that are clear enough to guide hypothesis formulation with specific predictions. For example, what is the relationship between the amount of time spent exercising and stress reduction? Testable hypothesis: increased exercise duration will result in lower self-reported stress levels among participants. So this hypothesis clearly specifies the direction of the relationship. As exercise duration decreases, stress levels are expected to decrease. So this is an example of clarity. So research question defines, this is what you need to know, the broad area of inquiry, sets up the stage for investigation. It usually asks what, how, and why something happens. A hypothesis, a specific prediction based on the research question that can be tested by empirical methods. It must always be testable, falsifiable, measurable, and derived from the research question. Both are, of course, interconnected. The question provides a direction, and the hypothesis specifies a testable prediction based on this direction. How can hypotheses be framed in a way that aligns with the research question study design? We need to frame how we can effectively frame hypotheses. We need to ensure alignment with the research question, of course, make hypotheses testable, ensure consistency with the study design, ensure clarity before address the direction relationship, make hypotheses clear and testable with a given time frame, and consider the type of hypothesis. Here, I want to say about how to make hypotheses clear is that what I want to say is that we need to ensure that the hypothesis can be realistically tested within the time frame and the resources of your study. So what this could be here, the action, refine your hypothesis to make it sure that it can be tested in a practical way, considering factors like time constraints, access to data, and research design limitations. For example, how does remote working impact employee productivity? Hypothesis: employees who work remotely at least 3 days a week will report higher levels of productivity than employees who work in an office setting 5 days a week. This hypothesis can be tested with a survey of productivity metrics within a reasonable time frame. Consider the type of hypothesis. The null hypothesis, often used in quantitative research, the null hypothesis assumes what? Assumes that there is no relationship or no effect between variables. Example, there is no significant difference in academic performance between students who use mobile learning apps and those who do not use them. This is a null hypothesis. What is the alternative hypothesis? This suggests that there is a relationship or effect between variables. For example, students who use mobile learning apps will have higher academic performance compared to those who do not use mobile learning apps. Both types of hypotheses should align with your research design and the type of data that you are collecting. So very important things that you need to know. And before concluding, I want to say about the common mistakes. Common mistakes are related with usually ambiguous hypotheses, with overly complex hypotheses. When we have hypotheses without a clear direction, hypotheses that cannot be tested, or overgeneralization, or we have a confusing hypothesis research question, confirmation bias, all these things that we need to avoid. Thank you very much for your attention. And the second part of my presentation will be next week because I wanted to be very clear today and very specific. So next time we complete this chapter, this topic. Thank you very much. For any question, I'm here to discuss.
Yeah, I think you have given a very in-depth explanation of every part of the research. I think our audience who have been following us, they would understand it very clearly. And if our audience have any questions, they can always post it in the comment box, and we will answer. I think they are more excited in listening to you sharing the facts and about research and how and all that. So I'm so happy that we can provide such a masterclass for our audience. Yeah, because this is not an ordinary class, and if you go out to do your 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 training for PhD, you know how much of money you got to pay. Here we are sharing free for the audience, for the global audience. So whoever you want to learn, you are most welcome. And we always appreciate your support. And we thank our Ambassador Professor Rania Lampu for her kindness and her willingness to provide us with research series. It's not going to be 1-2 months, it's going to be very long. So every Thursday, stay tuned and make sure that you mark your calendar to be with Professor Dr. Rania Lampu with her session. Thank you, Professor Rania Lampu. You really, I'm so happy to have you with us today on this series. Yeah, I was thinking that what we should do, always talking about, we have our SDG forum where we talk about a lot of other things. Here, I think this is something which you cannot get everywhere, and not everybody will be generous enough to offer. So let us be the first one to offer the whole series. you know Sharing knowledge is also is one of the highest form of charity. You see, charity does not only involve money, because we human being, how much of money you give is not enough. We are always greedy. Nothing is enough for us. You give 10 ringgit, $10 today, you said you want $20 tomorrow. You give 20, you want 50, you want 100, you want millions. So these are human beings. But when come to knowledge, if you get enough knowledge for what you need, you are satisfied. And this knowledge, nobody can steal from you. It is a permanent
Yes.
treasure which resides in you. Yeah, people can steal
Yeah.
your money, but nobody can steal your knowledge and your talent.
It's
So we
amazing
are
what you
proud.
say. Yes.
Yeah, it's really because today, if you ask me, whatever it is, whatever people may say that, you need skill, but before you acquire skill, you need the right knowledge. Knowledge is the foundation. Like, you have to go to school. If you don't go to school, you don't learn English. If you don't learn English, there's a lot of materials you can't read. Like now, we are presenting this masterclass free, and they won't even understand. So what a waste, right? So school is a foundation. That is education, knowledge, and skill is another thing. We have to couple it. So now in this 21st century, education, knowledge, and skill have to be coupled. We cannot decouple them. Once the moment you decouple them, you become redundant, become
Mhm.
handicapped. You cannot use one without the other.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. So
Mm-hmm.
you see how wonderful it is. So we are so happy today. I think Professor Rania is so very glad to, I got
Yes.
very shocked when she said she's willing to keep the whole series. Oh, I said this is blessing for many of them out there. You see, so thank you for your support. Thank you for being with us. Share with your
Thank
friends,
you.
and be with us again in another professional masterclass. The same topic, part 2, next Thursday. Thank you, Professor Rania. Thank you so much uh, for this wonderful session.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Yes. And